Well, thank you so much. My name's Mary Newbegin, and my colleague Kayla Landers and I are from ICAPE. That's the International Center for Academic and Professional English. And among other things, we like we like to do these webinars, these workshops through the year on an ongoing basis. We do them in the spring and in the summer and in the fall. Last summer, for example, we did a series with the career services. So please look at our schedule on the website from time to time and consider joining us. They're usually just an hour to an hour and a half long. We're hoping to be back on campus, but I believe that still a fair number of our workshops will continue to be online because they've been pretty popular. So the title today is Using Citations in Writing, and I'm going to let Kayla get started with our objectives.
Perfect, thank you. And just a note that we are recording, so the materials will be available for you afterwards. I'll email you the slides and the recording so that you have it as a resource. Feel free to interrupt at any time, ask questions, put questions into the chat as I'll monitor that. Today we want to just talk about the importance of citation, talk a little bit about some of the various methods, why they exist, and what some of the differences you might see. Discuss the importance of incorporating source material responsibly and accurately, introduce a quote appropriately, and successfully transform an original source through paraphrase. So those are what we're going to work at today. Again, if you do have specific questions, feel free to ask.
Thanks, everybody. I think if you take courses at Lehigh or you work closely with faculty and staff members, you know the importance of citations and you know that there are different styles. But how many times have you really looked at that university statement on academic honesty? So we're going to put the link in the chat here, and I'm going to mute my mic for just about a minute and give you a moment to take a look at that. And we're just going to have a quick discussion about any questions you might have, or just some thoughts about what that statement represents. So with no further ado, go ahead and take a look. So just checking in with everybody. Any thoughts on the responsibilities of the academic community, or any questions? If you are a new student or new to Lehigh, maybe your thoughts about what academic integrity means have changed as you have started to interact and write and delve a little more deeply into your assignments. How about you, Lee? Any thoughts on that? That's okay.
Yeah, by reading this page, I knew that it's very important to be academic integration, and you have taught me lots of information about like pragmatism. It's one aspect of academic integration. So I'm keep learning and avoid such situation.
Yeah, I think that's true. You know, definitely that's the why, that's the reason behind why it's important to attribute a source to the original creator of that quote or that idea. You know, ideas are considered intellectual property, and as members of an academic community, we share those ideas. But the idea is to give the original attribution to the owner of that idea. So those are just some things to consider. If you know, if you decide to read more deeply later and you do have questions, Kayla and I are always happy to talk and engage. We kind of view this idea of learning about academic integrity as an ongoing conversation, so no problem there. All right, let's go to the next slide, and Kayla's going to lead you through a little exercise with citation styles.
Okay, so if you are logged into that Pear Deck, again, maybe Mary could put it in the chat one more time for anybody who joined late, and the code. So Pear Deck, again, is just a way to anonymously add in your thoughts and your ideas. So just thinking about citation styles, there are a lot of different styles. So just in the Pear Deck, just add which citation styles are you familiar with, maybe which ones you've used or you've at least heard of. We're not going to test you then on how well you know them. We just want to see which ones you're most familiar with. So we'll give you a minute to add into the Pear Deck. If for some reason you can't get in the Pear Deck, just add it in the chat. It's fine. Just list which ones you know. Just get an idea of where everyone's coming from.
Kayla, when you're ready for me to show the Pear Deck slide, let me know.
I think we can go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, so we see MLA, APA, Chicago, in text and parenthetical. Absolutely. So those are definitely the three most common, MLA, APA, and Chicago. And yes, we have in-text citation, then we'll also talk about your references, your works cited. So if you want to go ahead to the next slide, we'll show you some more of the citation styles. So again, you guys named APA, MLA in Chicago, but there's also a few others, and there's even more than this as well. And so you might say, well, why are there so many different citation styles? Is anybody familiar maybe between MLA and APA? Why do we have these different citation styles? Does anybody know?
It might be useful if I can just chime in here for 1 second, Kayla. APA is American Psychological Association. And so APA is the most commonly used citation style in the social sciences. The College of Business also uses APA. Some colleges. MLA stands for Modern Language Association. So maybe that might help you, you know, kind of think of why.
So the reason that different citation styles exist and change over time is to address the different needs of different disciplines. So as Mary just mentioned, the social sciences are, focused more on scholarly articles and timing. And so the emphasis on the year is much more prominent in APA. So if you know anything difference between APA and MLA, you'll know that the in-text citation requires the year in APA. And this is why, because the research focuses on how current is this information, whereas in the humanities that typically use MLA, they might use a variety of different source types, including personal letters and other types of works that are more focused on who than the year. And so the emphasis is different. And then if we look at those three that you named, APA, MLA, and Chicago, there are also some variances there that both MLA and APA focus on that in-text citation as we saw in the pair deck, whereas Chicago is one that uses footnotes. And so in this case, it also is a focus on who the reader is going to be. And so in Chicago, it allows, if there's in the footnotes, you're not distracted by those in-text citations. You're able just to focus on the evidence but still have access to the sources. And so this is why there's different citation styles, is in order to focus on what is the purpose, who is the audience, and then you go from there. Of course, you need to follow the citation style that's required in your course. And so this might mean for one class you're using MLA, and for another class you're using APA. And that's very common. And so it's important to recognize some of the differences. But I will note that citation styles do change. APA just came out with a 7th edition rather recently, and so it's something that they've made changes. And again, this is to reflect what's going on in the world, where we have new types of sources. Sources are much more likely to be online, and so how do we cite those is constantly being changed and revised in these citation styles. But I will say, don't stress over citation styles. There are resources available for you in order to be able to figure them out. There's a lot of information to learn. The APA citation guide has over 400 pages. So that's impossible to memorize all of that information. Use the guides, use your course textbooks to help you with whichever style you need to use. So it's important to follow what the guidelines are, and there's some easy basics we'll talk about, like what should be in text. But there are very fine nuances that change depending on how many authors or exactly what type of source it is. Don't expect to memorize that. I've been working with APA for a long time, and I was, feeling very confident about it, but now there's a new edition, and so I have to go and reference the book as well. So just so you know, that is something that you'll continually go back to, even if you've used it for a while.
Yeah, it's a very necessary but not as much fun part of writing. And I would mention, I mentioned, just as an aside to my class yesterday, I ordered these wonderful brand new books in November. And guess what? It's APA 6th edition, and it's already changed. So, it happens. And, the textbook manufacturers are going to continue to sell textbooks. All right, so when you're learning a new citation style, let's talk about what to notice. So I've done a little color coding here so you can kind of see. And I've got a 1, 2, 3. And then I've got a phrase from a book that I use below, and it's color coded. So what information needs to go in? Well, first of all, in blue, you can see that I have the author's last names. John Swales and Christine Feek are the authors. So just the last name in APA. All right, so I wouldn't write John Swales, I'm just putting Swales. So if it were Kayla and I, and we have written together, it would be Landers and Newbegin, right? The year of publication is 2012. It's an older textbook, but boy, they really got it right. So I still use it. And then verb tense is important. So in green, you see verb tense. So here they're using present perfect note, have noted. And then you see the punctuation around foreign phrases, and then in red again, that period at the end of the second parenthetical citation. So what is parenthetical? Well, that just means that it's information that's enclosed in parentheses. So I'll read the whole thing now so you can kind of see how it's all put together. Authors Swales and Feek, 2012, have noted that foreign phrases are used in most languages for scholarly purposes. And then P for page number 406. In APA, if the page number is available, you should use it. And that's why I have that page number there at the end. I have paraphrased that, that chunk of text from page 406. But you notice that I used some unique phraseology, foreign phrases. That was Swales and Feek's original words, and I borrowed it, so I must put that part in quotation marks. And so that's, those are the things to notice when you learn a new style. How am I attributing this source? Where does the information about the author go? What verb tense should I use? And what kind of punctuation? In MLA, often you'll use the present tense. All right, a little bit more about citation basics here. So you must cite both in the text and then on a reference page. So the reference page is the last page of a paper that you're turning in for a class. And it's called different things with different citation styles. But that's where you list all of your sources. The in-text citation is just, when I'm referring to in-text, I'm just referring to this part that goes in the text, if you can see where my cursor is. Okay, so that's in-text. And then in a moment, we're going to show you a reference page. Okay. For this presentation, we're using APA as a model. When Kayla and I write, we submit papers for conferences, or, last year we were fortunate to have an article published. When we do that, we use APA. So here's some more basics. All right, so APA, it uses the author date method. That means that you've got the author's last name, and you've got the year and the page number. And I can see there's a couple questions in the chat, so we'll take a look at those in a moment. And then I have my reporting verb, argued that. And then again, all of the sources are listed again at the end of in the reference list. The author's names appear in alphabetical order with a hanging indent. What I mean by hanging indent, when you see my example in a moment, you'll see that that just means that if you're looking at the reference list and there happen to be like 40 references, in a doctoral thesis or a longer paper, it's not unusual to have a long reference list. I can go in and very quickly find the author I'm looking for by their last name. So that's why your instructors are going to be particular about that you have that order and that it looks the way it's supposed to look. So it's not a fussy English teacher thing. There's a good reason. Also, as you can see on that slide, there's an example of what IEEE would look like. IEEE is a citation style used by some of the engineering departments on our campus. I believe, Jackie, you and Jen, with your courses will be using IEEE. So this is how it might look different. That author Jones, and then the source is represented by the number 1. Well, those numbers will appear in the order that they appear in the paper. So there's some differences. If you go online, I like the Purdue OWL, the OWL, the Online Writing Lab, that's Purdue University. They have really nice web pages where you can just click to see different things. And they have there's a comprehensive IEEE style guide that you can access for free online, and it's a good one. So maybe before your courses start, if you have a few extra minutes, you can take some time and review that. All right, moving on to the next slide here. Citation basics, and these are the references, and Kayla's going to go over that. And while she's doing that, I'm going to look at the chat.
Okay, yes. So again, we're just, showing an example here so that you can understand that there are different citation styles and they're going to look different, and you have to follow the guidelines for whichever style is being utilized for your course. We just are focusing on APA in our examples, but we wanted to show you how it might look differently. Also, this is then important for you as you're reading scholarly articles and reading sources, of recognizing how they are attributing to their sources, and kind of can recognize some of that information as well. So in this case, this would be at the end of the paper, just showing you the differences between two different styles, APA, where Mary mentioned it's going to be in alphabetical order. It's going to have this hanging indent where that, if it continues on a second line, is indented so it can quickly find, not a numbered list. And there's a lot of nuances here, and we're not even going to get into them, but about capitalization, italicizing, and the punctuation that goes into that. That could be a whole workshop in itself of reminding of how to do these particular things. Again, our recommendation, I put them in the chat, was the Al Purdue, also the APA style guide. If you are using MLA or something, Al Purdue also has information for MLA, or you can just do a Google search for MLA style guide and find that information, or your textbook. Whereas IEEE, because it had that numbered list, they're going to reference in the order that they come in with these numbers. So just paying attention, and again, noticing some of the differences between citation styles. And we did have a question in the chat about IEEE being single spaced, but APA is a double spaced still. So that formatting still stays the same. They did make some changes in the overall structure for APA in 7th edition, that a student paper doesn't need the running head like in the past. So they've made some modifications to the title page and features like that in 7th edition, but still remains a double spaced. Yes, so yeah, the 7th edition, I'm still working through some of it, but a lot of it has to do with an APA 6th edition. If you had 3 authors the first time, you would name all of them, and then after that, if you used it again, you would use the et al. Now it's from the beginning, you use the et al. For 3 or more. So some changes like that are minor, but still important to recognize. So those are certainly some different things to pay attention to. So Oh, yes. Thank you, Mary, for clarifying that et al.
Yeah, I just put a couple notes in the chat. So if you wanted to look later at that Purdue OWL, et al. Is Latin. It just means and the rest. All right. Are we ready for the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, so what to cite? Here you can see I have an original passage, and I think what we'll do with this slide is I'm going to read the original passage, and then you can see my in-text citation is different. So as a writer, you have choices. You can either mention the writers with a reporting verb, Swales and Feek have noted, as noted by Swales and Feek, or you can put them in the parenthetical citation at the end. It really just depends on what you're saying. Now here I have a direct quote from the textbook, so I had to enclose the whole thing in quotation marks. Now this is a point that's very important. Any direct phraseology, anything that you've taken directly from the source, must be in quotation marks. So I'll read this, and then I'm going to mute my mic so that you can look at the quoted and the paraphrased material in the next two. Nearly all academic languages make occasional use of foreign phrases and expressions, either to add technical precision or to add color to the text. English is no exception. All right, now take a moment and read the other two. Okay, are there any questions about the difference between the quoted material and the paraphrased material? Note though that even in the paraphrased material, I have that little phrase, foreign phrases, and that came directly from the original quote. So I still have to put that unique phrase in quotation marks. And I think it's these little tiny things that really get students into trouble. You know, you're writing and you're paraphrasing quickly, and maybe there's just a little piece of that original that you forget. Any questions about that? Does everybody see what I'm talking about? So I'm talking about this little part where my cursor is in the paraphrased material. Okay. We're going to look at next a little bit of information about paraphrasing, and Kayla's going to lead you through that.
Okay, so before we move into breakout rooms and talk more specifically about paraphrasing, I'm curious what you think paraphrasing is. So you can either unmute yourself and let me know, or add it in the chat if you're feeling a little bit shy. What is paraphrasing?
Yeah, I think maybe you are repeating the same idea, like in other words, like the same idea, but you're using other words. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, exactly. So paraphrasing, we often use just putting something in our own words, but we have to keep that meaning. Now, one thing that I want to make clear, though, is although it's in our own words, paraphrasing also requires that we also restructure the passage. So we're going to look at that in a little bit of what that means. It's not enough just to change the words, but we have to change that structure, and we'll look at that in a little bit. And also key things, as we saw on the last slide, paraphrasing still requires a citation. So we're still attributing to the source, saying this isn't our idea, but we are blending it better by putting it in our own words. Should be entirely original, and if it's not, as we saw on the last slide, then you're going to keep quotation marks around any particular wording or a smaller phrase that maybe you couldn't make original, and you still will put the reference at the end. So what we're going to do now is go into breakout rooms and look at the phrase here, and we're going to put it in the chat so you have it available. And in your breakout room, you're going to work on a paraphrase. So with your group, you're going to talk about how you can change that particular passage into your own words. So are there any questions about what you might need to do in your breakout room, or we're intentionally kind of throwing you into the breakout room to try out the paraphrase, see what you do, what your strategies, and then we'll come back and give some pointers and things about talking about the challenges. So if you feel like, I'm not quite ready for this, that's intentional, to try and see how you do, and then we'll come back together and talk through some of that. So if you feel a little bit panicked of like, I'm not good at paraphrasing, that's why I'm in this workshop, that's okay. It's not a test, and that's why you'll be with a group to try and talk through what you might do. So are there any questions before we put you into those breakout rooms?
A good strategy just to get started is just to talk about what the overall meaning is.
Okay, so if no questions, I'm going to go ahead and create some breakout rooms that we're going to send you into and give you just a couple minutes to work through that. It is in the chat box. And if you need any help, just call us in and we will be happy to help, but just kind of start talking about how you would approach this and start to paraphrase it. Okay? All right. Let me just switch one person here. Okay. All right, so it looks like we have everybody back. So let's first start with how you think you did. How was that experience?
I really hate paraphrasing. That
Thank you
much
for
I
that.
can tell you.
Thank you for that honesty. Absolutely. So what is it that you hate about it?
Like for instance, that was kind of tough because there's not much that you can do without putting quotes, for that particular phrase or paragraph that you have there. So, I mean, because basically it's just saying that a long time ago or in recent times, German and French and Latin were all used for certain expressions, and only now it's more a little bit of Latin, whereas French and German not so much anymore. And so, I mean, how would you paraphrase that without using quite a few of those words in the original?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could say, Soils and, according to, Soils and Frank 2012, Latin is still kind of used in many fields to express ideas or whatever. But, I still a bit of Latin and many fields. I can see those in quotes, because how do I want to say many fields these days? Corporations, academic institutions, what?
Yeah, wonderful. So I think there's a couple of things there that were really great about what you did. So the first thing I think with a paraphrase is doing that idea of what is this even saying? You have to be able to understand the passage before you can paraphrase it. So if you don't comprehend and understand the passage, there's no way that you're going to be able to put it into your own words. And I feel like you did a nice job. You understood what the essence was and saying, okay, let me try and put this in my own words and explain it to us. And I think that was a great first start at that, so saying, okay, basically this means this. So that was a good first attempt of just saying, okay, I'm going to put it out there in my own words. And then, okay, what was it that I used that were some of the same expressions? And I like how you pointed out that there are some particular things that might lose the particular meaning that you need. So, right, so we can't always just plug in a synonym and say, okay, good, I put it in my own words, because it doesn't necessarily have the same meaning. So when we talk about fields, what are we trying to get at here, right? So if I say institutions, is that the same meaning that this particular author had? Or if I change that, is that going to change the essence? And so I think there are a lot of different challenges, and this is why particularly non-native speakers of English tend to quote more often than paraphrase, because it is hard work. It's hard work for native speakers. And so it's easier sometimes to say, like, oh, I'm just going to keep it in its own words and throw it on there. But paraphrasing is really important in order to really, it's your own writing and you want to be able to show what it is you can do. So it is something to work at. So with that, I think we'll move on, and Mary's going to give a strategy to help break down paraphrasing.
Absolutely. And I was just thinking for this that I should maybe I was thinking of cheating and going ahead 2 slides and just showing the patch writing so you can understand why we're doing this. Do you think that's all right, Kayla?
Yeah,
All
I
right.
can cover
So,
that.
yeah, so here you can see this is patch writing. So patch writing is what happens when students and well, anybody, I've done this too. I mean, I'll look at something and think that I've paraphrased it, and this is why the last step has to be compare what you wrote to the original, because this is what you don't want. You don't want to just go in and selectively change words and keep the order the same. So here's an example of that, and I'm going to mute my mic for just a second so you can see why this is not a good paraphrase. All right, so hopefully that gave you, we'll come back to this slide, but hopefully that gave you the idea that just changing the words is really not enough. So I'm going to introduce this strategy. So when you paraphrase, you want to not only change the words, but rewrite it, essentially. So here's a strategy that you can use that will help you paraphrase. And we call it, this is not original to Kayla and I. We have both done consulting with IELTS USA, and this is an IELTS thing, and it's brilliant. It's chunk, rephrase, rewrite. So you're looking at the natural chunks in the paragraph, and you're actually putting a slash mark in, going through the exercise of doing this. And then you're rephrasing those chunks and then rewriting it. So once you've kind of identified the pieces and how you're going to say them differently, then it becomes easier to rewrite. So here's an example. Academic writing is a crucial skill for all students. Let's look at this first sentence. Well, in this first sentence, I see three chunks. So academic writing, that's the first chunk. That's the what. Is a crucial skill. That's the next chunk. And then the last chunk is for all students. So you can kind of see like where you make the breaks. Sometimes a prepositional phrase, for all students. That's a sort of a natural chunk. So I'm going to give you a moment to look at the rest of this paragraph and figure out how you would chunk it out. Where would you put your chunks? All right, so does anybody want to take the second sentence where you put your chunks in that one? Anybody want to be brave and volunteer? Norman, I see you smiling. I can see you there. You want to give it a go?
I'm not sure in this case, like, to be honest. Yeah.
You know, here's the thing
Right.
though, Norman, there's no, like, you can't, if you and I have different ideas about where the chunks go, that's okay. As long as you end up with a good sentence, give it a go.
Okay. So what I did, I said, this is because, then I put like, this was my first part. Then I said, most instructors assess, then that was my second chunk.
Mhm.
Then their students, then that was my fourth chunk through written assignments. That is how I did.
Beautiful.
I did it almost the same way too.
Okay, good. Thanks, Chris. Chris, do you want to grab the next one after that?
There is little doubt
Perfect.
that academic writing in English
Mhm.
is more difficult
Mhm.
for international students
Mhm.
whose dominant language is not English.
Beautiful. And then the next step after that would be to just go in and find, you know, particular words and see if you can think of a synonym. So how about the word crucial? What's it?
Important.
Beautiful. Any others?
Imperative.
Mm-hmm. Vital, necessary. Yeah, I mean, so again, when you're the author, there's no wrong answers. The idea is that you're just making it, you're interpreting it, and keeping the essence of what the original author is saying. And that's the other important piece. So here's what I did just to kind of show you, you know, ways that you could chunk it, and then words that you might want to really think about, although it's not enough, as we saw here, to just switch out words. So let Kayla take it for the next two slides.
Okay, so as we already mentioned, just avoid the patch writing. Some people call it plagiarizing. So this is just kind of saying, okay, I'm going to substitute the words. We also have to think about changing those chunks in the order. I think of it like a puzzle. Instead of just putting in a new puzzle piece, you also have to kind of flip those puzzle pieces and really change everything around. And as Mary mentioned, the key to that is really comparing at the end and saying, okay, I looked at this. I have an understanding of what it means. I'm going to chunk it. I'm going to rephrase it, and then really put it to the side. Don't even look at it while you're writing the paraphrase, and then come back and look at it again and say, okay, do I still have the same meaning, but have I changed enough? And if there's something you feel like I just can't change it, put that smaller section into the quotation marks. So go ahead, Mary, to the next one.
Yep.
I think maybe we should skip this one, Mary, and continue on with quoting and the rest. And if we have time at the end, we can come back and practice maybe.
Or another thought, if you wanted to practice this on your own and then send it to one of us, we would be happy to give you feedback on your paraphrase. I think the most important thing is to remember the reading strategy of writing down ideas while you're reading, because that gives you the chance to put things into your own words as you go. It also helps you to remember what you're reading. So it's sort of like if you know you have to write about something, consider that annotation as a way to prepare to write and save you time when you're paraphrasing. All right, so on to the next slide. And Kayla's going to talk to you about quoting.
Okay, so, paraphrasing is going to give you trouble. Keep working at it. I will send you these materials, and if you want to practice that particular one and send it to us, we'd be happy to give you some feedback. We were going to practice, but I just want to make sure we get through some other ideas as well. So when we talk about quoting, it is a necessary as well. If you find a relevant quote, but the key is when you find something relevant, you also have to make sure it does support your argument. So I often see students who are like, okay, I'm required to have 3 sources, so I'm just going to throw a quote in there and say, yep, I used a source and we're good. That's not enough either. You have to make sure it really is supporting your argument, and you also have to frame it. So what we mean by framing is lead into it, give the quote, and follow up. Some people also call this a quote sandwich, right? So that you are giving some lead-in information. Why is it relevant? Give the quote, and then explain it, right? So you can't just throw it in there and like, okay, good. I have to explain how it connects with what you are trying to argue. So some key things about quoting, of course, is put it in quotation marks. Use a reporting verb. So this is kind of that lead in, right? When you're framing it. So we're going to give the idea that this is leading into ideas that are not our own, gives also some idea about how it fits in the conversation. Some different citation styles also like you to give some of the credentials here. Credentials meaning where did they work or how are they qualified to be giving this information. Other citation styles don't use that type of lead in. So here, and they're using reporting verb in the blue, we see Swales and Feek, 2012 have noted. That's the reporting verb. It's giving us an idea of what kind of information you're going to give. And punctuation, we're going to talk about that more specifically in a couple slides. So we're going to go ahead and skip to the next one about reporting verbs. So reporting verbs have some different types of information and meaning behind them. And so it's important to vary your reporting verbs. You don't want to just say Swales and Feek, state, and then the next one say state. So varying which one you're using. Use a list like this as a resource. Even a quick Google search of reporting verbs will help you say, okay, what is it that they are doing in this particular quote? This particular list we feel are pretty neutral, but if we continue to the next one, we'll talk about the verbs and purpose. So reporting verbs, can also convey a particular tone or the author's position, and can help you really, again, frame what your quote, what the purpose behind that quote is doing. So a particular example in the second one there, like opposes, right? This has a particular tone and is setting forth what you intend to do with that quote. So these word choices can be critical in helping you frame your quote. And so this is kind of one step beyond what students typically think of. It's just like, okay, I'm going to put the quote there, but this one simple word choice can really make a difference in framing your quotation. So in the next slide, again, these small nuances when we look at words. So in this particular chart we have, all of these words have the concept of giving or taking goods or information from or to another person. And if you look at these though, they have slightly different connotations and different, one is a little bit stronger. So if you take a look at those, which one do you think is stronger?
And the chart reads across, so like between take and seize, which one is stronger? I'm going to seize your cell phone, Kayla. Did I say that?
Who uses seizes with a telephone? Take.
I actually, I had a student who used the word seize in a sentence, and it gave me pause because I had to explain that, seize is a word that actually means, that has this connotation of repossessing, it's
Yeah.
not a positive word. And so, with take and seize, take is clearly a softer word. I wouldn't really take Kayla's cell phone either, but I have borrowed it. We share an office, but back in the old days when we were on campus. So with request or demand?
Of course, demand would be stronger.
Yeah, all right. Give or bequeath?
Give or bequeath.
Yeah.
Bequeath is stronger.
Bequeath is to leave it or.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If English is not your first language necessarily, right? How do you, so you have to know. And so bequeath, for anyone who doesn't know, bequeath means that you're going to give your possession away after you usually it's after you die, right?
Bequeath it.
Bequeath yeah.
And this is also, again, back to paraphrasing, thinking about the synonyms that you put in. It doesn't always work just to say, okay, I'm going to find a synonym and throw it in there, because if you said, okay, the original said give, so I'm going to say bequeath, not the same exact meaning. And so you have to be cautious on using those synonyms that you're not changing the essence or the meaning behind. So these nuances in words are important here for both leading into a quote, but also when you think about a paraphrase as well.
And I think sometimes students like to use a thesaurus, which is fine. It's a tool. But even with a thesaurus, you really have to think about what word you're using and be intentional.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to do a little word quiz here, everybody. And so we've got a list of words, and I'm just going to give you a moment because we're getting closer to our time. We go till 8:15 today, right? I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we're getting closer to the end of our time, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions and answers. So go ahead. This is a Pear Deck slide. Which of these words do you think shows bias, and are there any words you don't recognize?
What kind of bias?
Well, if you are, say, critiquing a paper, if you're writing a critique, or if you're reviewing a scholarly article, do you think if any of these words were used, they might show bias? Bias sometimes is one of those tones that's really sometimes hard to pick up. And, we like to tell students, well, anybody, not all sources are created equal.
Hmm. Whitewashers.
Oh, for sure. Sanitizing something, yep. And even the word warns.
Speculate. Yeah, I guess so.
Or insists.
Speculates.
So I'll take about 10 more seconds and then we'll peek at the responses. It's kind of fun to see what people write. And I think you're onto something, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought about glasses over. I was like, glasses over.
So that, it brings up that conversation. I think I accidentally popped us out of screen share and I apologize. It brings up the conversation, if you are talking about someone else's writing, if you're a young scholar, you have to be very careful because, you can get into trouble if you say that the person ignores or the person thinks. If you're talking about an expert in the field and you say, well, they think this, you can understand why that person might, and ignores is actually a really strong word. If you say that someone ignored a fact or a detail, that can be really touchy, So there is some sensitivity. And the other thing, and we know this as writing instructors, right? Writing is personal. If you are spending 2 years, 3 years, or 6 years of your life to get a master's degree or an undergraduate degree or a PhD in another part of the world, yeah, writing is going to be personal. And so you have to tread lightly, when you're commenting on others' writing. Any thoughts or questions about any of these words or any of the ideas in the chat?
I just want to go back for 1 second. There was a question in the chat about the time when you would use past tense versus present or future tenses, particularly with these reporting verbs. So I did add in the chat, yes, it's going to depend on the citation style. Different citation styles are going to use different tenses. And so again, this is where you look back at that original and say, okay, what citation style am I using, and look at what their rules or conventions are. A suggestion we have is to look, just read sources from within your discipline that are using that citation style and take note of how are they citing and what type of verb tenses are they using. Even looking at, okay, what type of words are they using, and are they using ones that are kind of more neutral, or are they using ones that have some of these particular tone that you might see. That also is going to vary depending on citation style. So I did put in there just some of the ideas with APA, what the rules are, that it's mostly going to be past or present perfect, but if you are talking about like your conclusions, limitations, future directions, that will be present tense. So it kind of also depends what type of information you're providing, what verb tense it'll be.
Yeah, and if you're talking about your the implications of your work, if you're looking ahead, what you might do in the future, you might use future tense. So if you're looking at a scholarly paper, the introductions, the method, the different pieces of the report might be written using different tenses. And the most important thing is to know, the essence of what you're trying to present. We're going to do a little word quiz. So we can do the Pear Deck again. Can you think of a suitable verb for 1, 2, and 3? And we'll do this one just real quick. Think on your feet. Oops. Okay, let's take a look at these paired X slides. Opposing an argument. I don't think you'd say agree. Opposes the view, refutes the view, disputes the view. In this study, the authors discovered, claimed, found, concluded, maybe not from just one study. And then the last one, a tentative argument, Adams argued. So remember using the past tense if it was 2019, found. Yeah, these are difficult. These are difficult. Any questions about this little quiz?
And again, here, you know, if we go back a couple slides, reporting verbs and purpose, those give you some ideas of maybe ones, maybe off the top of your head or couldn't think, but, you know, words like advises, asserts, calls for, cautions, emphasizes, insists, maintains, opposes, questions, stresses, suggests. So again, just doing a search on reporting verbs, and a lot of resources will even have some categories of reporting verbs of saying these reporting verbs help you oppose, these ones help do this. So using those resources to help you kind of say, okay, what is the purpose behind this? So just kind of keeping that in mind as well, looking back at these resources, and I'll email you the resources and some lists to help you along the way. So it doesn't have to be like right off the top of your head. You can use those lists to help you, and then as you feel more comfortable. And again, the more you read, those will also help you pick up on different types of reporting verbs and the purpose behind them. So let's go ahead and move on, if there are no questions, to some punctuation. Everybody good to move on? Good, I see some head nods. Okay, so punctuation basics. So again, there are a lot of nuances behind punctuation and what it's going to look like. What we're going to focus on here is a lot of the in-text, not the punctuation that falls in the references, because again, that's a lot of different nuances, and really we want to emphasize, go to the style guides, right? And use that as a way to help you figure out, okay, I think of the style guide as almost like equations that are available if you're more into kind of math or that kind of system, if maybe language isn't what you are strong in, and you say, okay, yeah, I'm used to equations. It's like plugging in information. Okay, I need the author, plug it in. You know, that's X. And then Y is the year. And so you just plug in what you know and put it in there, and say, okay, here's where I need different types of punctuation. But in text, when you're going to incorporate short quotations, of course, we just said place them in quotation marks. We're going to have the phrase according to Swales. Okay, so that's our signal phrase. And since we are demonstrating an APA, we have the year and then a comma. This particular information is just an introductory clause, and so we set it off with a comma. Also note at the very end of it, so part of this is a paraphrase, and then the particular wording that we didn't change in quotation marks, and then at the end, the parenthetical, the page number, and that period's going to go after that parenthetical. So we want to pay attention to that after the parenthetical, after that page number, that's where your punctuation.
I think that's one of the most common errors that I see with students, is putting that period in the wrong spot.
Yes, absolutely. And put periods and commas inside the closing quotation mark except when you have that parenthetical documentation. And since we're talking about citation, you are likely going to have parenthetical documentation. You better have it if it's not your own ideas. You know, you might see a dialogue where the quotation, the period goes inside, but when we're talking about citation, you're going to have parenthetical. You need to have that period come after the parenthetical documentation. All right, go ahead to the next slide, please. So some variance here is when you have question marks or exclamation points, what do you do with those? And so this really is a question about, is that punctuation part of the original quote? So if the original quotation that you're going to use was a question, then it does go inside the quotation mark. Okay, so in example A, you see, speaking at a 4th of July celebration, Mr. Price said, why not have your own fireworks, with the question mark. In that case, the original was a question, so we leave it in, and then after the parenthetical, we have the end period. In example B, this time you're asking a question about a quotation, and so the question mark replaces the period after the parenthetical, no punctuation inside the quotation mark. Does that make sense? Yes, okay, head nods, good.
Can I just add one more point?
Sure.
Also noticing that that first word inside those quotation marks begins with a capital letter. Okay.
Okay. And then semicolons and colons always go outside the closing quotation marks. So you see the example there. So if you're questioning punctuation, again, style guides have all of these as well, but those are the general things that you should keep in mind. But again, in the references, there are a lot of different types of punctuation. Is that a comma? Is it a period after the title and after the year and after abbreviations? That's where you look at that style guide and say, okay, I'm plugging in information. What I will note here, as we're kind of wrapping up between this talking about style guides, have any of you used something like an online, like BidMe, or a reference thing that where you plug in information online and have it do your references for you? Has anybody used one of those? Yeah, okay. And that's not cheating, that's okay. However, just a caution is that it is oftentimes plugging in what, you know, what is available. So it's not always 100% accurate. So if, for example, some reason this scholarly article had all capital letters for the title, that's how it's going to pull the information into the reference. So what you need to do is go back and double check some of that information to make sure that it is in the correct format, but it is a good starting point. So don't take it as, I've had students like, well, I used that and how is everything, you know, how did I get them wrong still? Well, again, it's like just plugging in the information that's available, and that might pull the wrong information, or if there was a spelling error somehow, like that'll pull that over. So just make sure you go back and double check those. It can still be a great starting point, but just be cautious. Really takes time, but it is such an important part of writing these citations, getting it right. If you don't do it right, going back to that very first slide that Mary talked about, academic integrity, if you cite incorrectly, even if you were trying, you could still have plagiarism, right? There's two different types of plagiarism, intentional and accidental, basically. And so making sure you get this right is incredibly important. I'm sure you know that. That's why you're here this morning. It's going to take practice. And Mary pulled up the next slide, so I'll let her go ahead and then we'll take any questions.
Thank you so much. Well, I was just thinking as we were talking, we have a couple of upcoming workshops. If you are eager for a little more grammar, we're going to have a grammar workshop. I don't have my flyer handy right at my desktop, but it's on our iCape website. Kayla and I will also be doing a workshop later in the spring with Carrie Sorrell Baldwin from LTS. And so if you'd like to know more about time savers, and you know, again, it's not cheating, it's a good idea to use RefWorks or the tools that are available. please consider joining us for one of those future workshops. I want to thank everybody. You guys were a great audience early in the morning if you're on East Coast time, or evening for those our friends over in a different part of the world. We'd really appreciate your feedback this morning. If you could take a few moments to fill out the survey. We also take requests. So if there's something that you would like us to do for you, we have done and will continue to take requests for workshops. So are there any questions about the material or anything? And Kayla also put that link for the Google form in the chat. Thank you so much for that, Kayla.
Yes, and I also put the file for the spring workshops, and I will email that to you with the resources that I send for today's workshop. But that'll give you an idea of what we're offering in the spring, but definitely still fill out that survey and let us know what you're looking for, what you need. Of course, Citations is a lot of work, and we'll continue to bring it up in different formats like Mary mentioned. That we will continue to address it in different ways to continue to help with citations.
Yeah, so we have a full spate of workshop opportunities for you. So consider joining us in the spring. We try to limit them to 75 minutes when the semester is up and running because everybody is really busy. Also, if you have thoughts about a time of day that is good for you, we also are eager to hear what times you like. So you can let us know that as well. Tell your friends and colleagues to consider joining us for a workshop in the spring.
Any other questions or comments?
Is everybody ready for classes to start next week? I'm getting there. I have a good bit of work to do on my course sites.
All right, if no other questions, then everyone have a great day or rest of your night, if it's evening where you are. And again, after we finish here, I'll send you the materials so that you have them for yourself. And thank you for joining us.
Thanks for joining us. Best of luck with your new semester, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.